Hello and welcome to the Berean Voice. I'm Randy Seaver. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about the difference between Leighton Flowers' view concerning the relationship between faith and regeneration and the Calvinistic view concerning faith and regeneration. Before we do that, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that I'd like you to be thinking about. The first question is this: is the gospel spiritual truth? That is the gospel truth that we would never have understood had it not been revealed to us by the Spirit? We could not know it apart from revelation. Is it spiritual truth? And the second question is a reception of the gospel a spiritual response to that spiritual truth? Is a reception of the gospel a spiritual response to that spiritual truth? I've posed those two questions to Mr. Flowers on the comment section of one of his videos, maybe more than one of his videos. It is also a question I asked him probably about 3 years ago on a Facebook page, and as yet I have no answer to the question. I think it would be very interesting to hear the answer to it, but I'd like you to be pondering those two questions. Is the gospel spiritual truth? That is it truth revealed to us by the Spirit? And number two, is a reception of the gospel a spiritual response to that message? Now, I've been listening to a great deal of what Leighton Flowers has to say, and of course he has a great deal to say. I was wading through one of his very lengthy videos. It runs probably 2.5 hours. And the title of the video is How John Piper Flips the Order of Salvation. And of course there was a great deal more there of Leighton Flowers than there was of John Piper. But I came to a particular point, and this was one of those things that I had to listen to, and then having listened to it, I had to back it up and listen to it again, and then listen to it a third time. And I almost could not believe my ears when I heard what Leighton Flowers said. You can find it on this particular video. The marker is at 1 hour, 54 minutes, and 50 seconds. That's where he basically begins saying what he's going to say. And he says this is really important, and he is exactly right, because this really explains to us the difference between his view and our view. I think it's really would be an exercise in futility to debate Mr. Flowers in the order of faith and regeneration, because we would be speaking completely different languages. Because what Mr. Flowers understands to be faith, what he understands to be conversion, seems to be something altogether different from what we understand to be conversion. This is what he said. People always talk about how you can't love God, and I think he meant how you can't love God unless you've been regenerated. You must be regenerated to love God. But when you are regenerated, you're going to love God. People always talk about how you can't love God. He said, I've been doing evangelism my entire life. I'm a director of evangelism for Texas Baptist. This is part of my work. It is my livelihood, okay? So I do a lot of personal evangelism, a lot of group evangelism, a lot of public evangelism, all kinds of evangelism. And when I'm talking to people, I have never yet, in all my years in evangelizing people, never seeing somebody who comes to a place of repentance and brokenness who just loves God. They just don't. In fact, it takes sometimes years before they come to a place of restoration and loving God, because it's not about loving God in order to be saved. It's not what it's about. Now, that I find to be absolutely incredible. It isn't simply that he says that a person doesn't come to the place of loving God when he is converted, but that he says a person can go for years and not love God. He went on to say that it really begins with fear. It's like when I was a kid and my father told me to mow the lawn. I didn't do it because I loved him. I did it because I feared the belt and I wanted the allowance. But now I've come to the place that when Dad asks me to do something, I do it because I love him. But it took me years, he says, to get to that point. Before it was just fear and hope of reward. And people, when they come to the place of conversion, they don't love God. They're afraid of going to hell, and they want to go to heaven. So they fear the belt. They want the allowance. Listen, that is not biblical conversion. I find this to be exceedingly disturbing, especially to hear that he is the director of evangelism for the Southern Baptist in the state of Texas. And he has so little understanding of what true conversion really is. Suppose I said to a person, do you want to go to heaven when you die? And I said to him, before you answer that question, let me tell you what going to heaven is like. Going to heaven is going to be like being in church for eternity. How many people do you think would want to go to heaven? You can't even get them to church now, much less make them want to go to heaven. If going to heaven is like being in church for eternity. Imagine spending eternity singing the praises of God, adoring Him, seeing, the majesty of His grace and His glory and just rejoicing in Him. Do you want to go to heaven when you die? You know God's going to be there when you get there, and God is holy. There's not going to be any foolishness. You're not going to be able to indulge your fantasies. None of the rest of that. Do you really want to go to heaven when you die? But you see, if people don't have a clue about heaven, if they think they'll get to play golf every day or whatever, have all the food they want to eat and all the rest of that, sure, they want, especially if the alternative is hell. Who in his right mind, out of sinful interest, isn't going to say, yeah, I want to walk the aisle. I want to hear the pitch. I'll sign the card. I'll get baptized. And I don't ever have to love God. My life doesn't have to change at all. And I can guarantee you that there are Southern Baptist churches, and I'm not just picking on Southern Baptists, but Mr. Flowers is a Southern Baptist. There are Southern Baptist churches that are filled to the brim with people who have never, ever been converted. In the first church I tried to pastor years and years and years ago, 2 or 3 months before I arrived, there had been an evangelistic campaign. I think it went on for 2 weeks, and 70 people made decisions for Christ. By the time I arrived on the scene, these people had their names on the church roll. They had been baptized, but not one single one of them was continuing to attend the services of the church. We tried to locate them, ran them down, finally sent them a letter, and we kind of cleaned up the roll, but these people had all been assured that they were going to go to heaven when they died, but they had not the slightest interest in the things of God. That is not biblical conversion. And it does no good whatsoever to talk to Mr. Flowers and others like him about the order of faith and repentance to regeneration if he doesn't understand at all what regeneration accomplishes in the heart of dead sinners. There's little question that we can agree with him that sinners can do everything he thinks they need to do in terms of faith and repentance without ever having been regenerated at all. And we're going to talk about that issue a little bit later on, because one of the things Mr. Flowers likes to say about our view is that he believes we think that sinners are callous as far as their conscience is concerned. He believes that we believe that sinners are so blind that they can't see and know anything about God. He believes there is no difference between what we believe a person is like when he is born in a state of pervasive corruption, and what will be true of him if he continues to reject the gospel and ultimately is judicially hardened or judicially blinded. That is not our position. Our view is not that every sinner is so blind that he can see no evidence of God or respond in any way whatsoever. It is not our view that the conscience is so callous that it cannot witness to a person, or the person is so callous toward his conscience that he can't hear. That's not our view. We believe that sinners do see, and we believe that sinners do know. We believe that sinners are able to know the difference between right and wrong. We believe that sinners are able to understand what God requires, what God's law demands, even understanding it so well that they can teach other sinners how they have gone wrong. They are able to understand the truth of God well enough in a state of fallen nature, not only to choose between what is bad and what is good, but between what is good and what is excellent. You see, you can't read Romans 1 and 2 without understanding that we, as fallen sinners, are able to see and know that God exists, and that God is powerful, and that God is indeed God, and that God should be worshipped. God should be glorified. We should be grateful to him. We can see that. We can know that. In fact, we don't believe we have to try to prove to sinners that those things are true. We simply presuppose that they understand them. Furthermore, we understand from Romans 1:32 that they know that judgment is coming. We don't have to prove that to them. Who, knowing the judgment of God, who, knowing the decree of God, that those who do such things are worthy of death, not only go on doing them, but take pleasure in others who are doing them. They know that. The conscience is able to witness to us concerning what is right and what is wrong. Even the Gentiles, which don't have the law, know innately, by birth, by nature, certain things that are contained in the law, and they actually do certain things the law requires, Paul says. They know these things. The problem is not that we don't know God and can't see God. The problem is that when we see God, we do not understand his glory. We do not appreciate who he is. That's the problem. That's what Paul means when he says, when they knew God, or although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, neither were they thankful. What does that mean? Well, what it means is they did not understand his weightiness. They did not understand his value. They did not understand his importance. And they thought that everything else in the whole universe was more important than God. In fact, they came to the place that they worshiped and served the creature instead of the Creator, because they found the creature of more value than the Creator. That's the problem. Now we're going to come back to the question we asked initially, and those two questions are, is the gospel spiritual truth? And when a person receives the gospel, is that reception a spiritual response to the message the Spirit has revealed? We're going to come back to that in our next video. I hope you won't just watch this video and quit, but that you'll go on with the rest of them, that you will like them, and that you will subscribe to the channel so that you can keep up with what we're doing here. I think this is important stuff, and so we're going to come back to it. We're going to ask those two questions again, and then we're going to see how the Scriptures answer the questions. Until next time, may God richly bless you.